What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Thursday edition of Back Your Play with Q. As always, I'm your host, Rich Quinones, hashtag BYP. Check out the YouTube channel, Rich Q on Q, and the dapper one right there, fixing his lapel mic, if you will, is our guy, our unbelievable college football insider. I love catching my guy off guard, Nick Kosko, for On 3 Sports, at Nick Kosko 59. As fast as it took you to do that, that's how fast that game was done the other night in that national championship game, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Rich. And yeah, I almost forgot about the game at this point because it was so bad. I mean, I shut it off probably, just from the comfort of my couch. It was 45-7. I'm like, all right, now it's definitely over. There's just no way the TCU is coming back. But I mean, for all we know, Rich, that game could have been over before the first ball was snapped. You know what I mean? So I'm sure we'll dive more into what it meant, what it means. But, the way I look at it, maybe TCU lost that game before they got there. All the emotion might have spilled out against Michigan in the semifinals, and that was just the cherry on top if they would have won that game. But I'm not saying they were going to be happy to be there, but that's certainly what it seemed like from the casual and the outsider perspective.
And I think that's a fair point. I mean, we can never put ourselves in the minds, right, of the players, of the coaching staff, of the university per se. But in that spot, that's your classic example of the boys against the men. I mean, it was evident that Georgia was just light years ahead of them in talent. It just did not matter if it was a 14-7 game after one quarter. You just got the sense Georgia was teasing and toying with them. And quite frankly, full transparency, I mentioned it on Monday's edition of BYP. After the first quarter, I turned the game off because I knew it was going to be a rout. I woke back up counting sheep, and then I realized 60 something odd points later. I mean, that's embarrassing as a national championship showing. And I think what happens now is you start to say, man, Alabama, Nick Saban, David Pollock basically stole his soul when he mentioned that Georgia was going to be the face of college football for the next several years. But it starts to beg the question now. It's always Monday morning quarterbacking, right? Did the right team get in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone that wants to try to, again, like you said, Monday morning quarterback or try to change history, so to speak, and say TCU didn't deserve to be in based on that national championship performance. I say, well, did you forget about the semifinals? I mean, you saw Ohio State and Georgia go toe-to-toe, so obviously those two deserve to be in there. Everyone wanted Michigan to be in there because they were undefeated and they had already beaten Ohio State, and they were 13-0 before the semifinals, and TCU beat them. Now, was it Michigan's bad day? I mean, I still firmly believe that was Michigan's probably one of their worst performances, and they still almost won the football game. But that doesn't mean TCU shouldn't have been in there. TCU beat them. TCU flat out beat them. They were opportunistic, as we mentioned before, on defense. They beat Michigan pretty much at their own game, and they knocked them out of the playoff and got to the title game. And now, did anybody outside of TCU really want TCU in the national championship game? From the casual perspective, probably not, because it's like, all right, well, unless it's an underdog story that is going to finish with a great ending, i.e. beating Georgia, no, we don't want to see that. We want to see the two best teams go at it. So that's where I think that argument comes from, where, well, Alabama should have been in there. They dominated the Big 12 champion Kansas State Wildcats in the Sugar Bowl. Alabama should have been in there. Bryce Young, he won a Heisman Trophy last year. You have Will Anderson on defense. These guys are both in the running for the number one overall pick come April. So, yeah, we want Alabama in there. Alabama should have been in there. I don't necessarily think of it that way. Now, this does beg the question, or at least maybe in my head, it makes the argument for the expanded playoff and as to why it's going to be good. And again, we know it's coming 2024. I know this is a longer conversation I'm sure we could dive into on this segment, of course, but this probably makes the argument of, well, now if there's 12 teams, maybe it sorts itself out better. And you don't just get these 4 teams in there where you have 2 classic games, but then the championship game, you were due for the letdown, and there's your letdown. But to me, it was just more of Georgia played a perfect game. TCU was overmatched, and it snowballed after that because Georgia just kept piling it on, and they just didn't stop. They didn't call the dogs off until, midway through the fourth quarter, and they were still putting up points.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, it reminded me of years ago where we'd get great AFC and NFC championship games, respectfully, and then the Super Bowl many, many moons ago would be a rout. I mean, it would turn into a rout. I mean, we saw it in the mid to late 80s and then some of the 90s with the Dallas and the Buffalo. So I go back to something you said in that letdown. We don't believe it in the pros, but you're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, well, in some cases 25 and 28, 29. But anyway, where you're going to get that letdown. I think it's a humbling lesson. And quite frankly, I can't see TCU getting back to that position next year. You mentioned Alabama. Alabama right now, third best odds. Now losing Bryce Young is a major loss at plus 700, but we can always account for Nick Saban and the Tide winning 10 plus games, right?
Right.
So I want to give you three teams real quick. And let me ask you this actually to start. Does Georgia have the makeup to three-peat? Because they would be the first team since Minnesota back in 1934 to 1936 to win it 3 straight years in a row. So
it's hard to believe that it's Minnesota, by the way, out of all the teams you could have mentioned in college football, and Minnesota did it back in the 30s. And just just to answer that first part of the question real quick, do they have the makeup? Short answer is yes. A three-peat, I mean, that's out of the realm of possibility to the instant reaction, because they're like, well, there's no way they can three-peat. It's hard enough to repeat. Now, to win 3 in a row, they have the makeup, sure, but just to continue, just for you to continue your point there, you already mentioned Alabama, so I mean, I'll let you go from there. But you already mentioned Alabama. If Georgia three-peats, then we're talking about, all right, now they're the dominant force in college football.
And that yes, and thank you. That kind of leads me into it, because if you look at the odds right now, right, you've got some sleepers. You've got Clemson at plus 1,500. You've got Texas at plus 2,000. We'll get into Harbaugh in Michigan, USC at plus 700, Ohio State plus 600. Now, again, are we going to see, the drop off at the quarterback position, but yet you're getting Marvin Harrison Jr. back. I mean, his numbers, by the way, freshman, 11 balls for 139 yards, 3 touchdowns, sensational sophomore season. It's an all pro wide receiver, almost 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns, 77 balls caught. And then I mentioned Alabama at plus 700. And then the little sneaky one, USC is at plus 700. Georgia, obviously, odds wise, is at minus 300. So the books are telling you right now, Nick, in mid-January, fresh off another championship, that they are the odds-on favorite to win it again next year.
Yeah, the way you look at it is, too, you mentioned the quarterback position. That's the most important thing. And obviously for Ryan Day in Ohio State, their offensive systems are predicated on having a great quarterback. We saw Justin Fields once he transferred from Georgia, how he broke out under Ryan Day, and obviously he turned himself into a first-round pick, and now what he's doing with the Bears, I'm sure he'll continue to develop on the NFL level. C.J. Stroud steps in immediately, and he was great in the Heisman. He was a Heisman finalist the last 2 years, but he's going to go to the NFL. So now you have to go with, you have Kyle McCord, you have Devin Brown. Their 5-star quarterback, Dylan Raiola, he actually recently just decommitted within the last month. So you don't know if he's going to end up recommitting to Ohio State or he's going to go somewhere else. So the future of the Ohio State quarterback position is very interesting. And obviously, it's still almost too early to tell right now with the quarterbacks, because you have the next signing day and then you have the transfer portal, which is always active. And then once spring practice ends, I mean, you can get a new quarterback after spring practice, plug him in the summer and say, all right, you know what, plug and play type of guy. And the same goes for Alabama. What's going to happen there? Bryce Young's going to the NFL. Who knows what they're going to do next? Obviously, I'm not going to say Alabama's one. I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago about Drake May, the North Carolina quarterback, who's going to be a Heisman contender next year, how he was supposedly offered millions of dollars to transfer elsewhere. I'm not going to say Alabama was one of those teams, but they were one of those teams that were in on Drake May during his initial recruitment process. So does Alabama go after a guy like that in terms of an NIL deal in the transfer portal? So when you weigh all these factors where the quarterback is the most important position, and even in the college level, it is the most important position. So how do you replace those guys? Georgia is the favorite right now. They're going to be preseason number 1. Yep. They're going to be everyone's favorite. I would say the betting odds are right now in the instant reaction, where we're only less than a week out from the championship game, or a week removed, I should say. They are the favorite to three-peat here, but Alabama's going to be back in the running. Obviously, LSU had a great first year under Brian Kelly with, some bumps in the road, but they're going to be a contender. They obviously already beat Alabama this year. How do those teams match up against each other? Tennessee's probably going to be really good again. We're talking about just the SEC there, Rich, sure. And then you mentioned the Ohio States, the Michigans. Michigan, to me, is dependent upon what Harbaugh does. If he's not back, are they still going to be great and maybe contend for the Big Ten? I think so, but Harbaugh is that extra element. USC, obviously, Lincoln Riley, year 2 under him, you would expect more development there. And then the Big 12, does Texas finally break out? Does Oklahoma rise back up to the top? TCU, can they do it again? Probably not. But so I'm looking at the SEC or the Big 10 to kind of take over next year. Clemson's always in the running just because it is Clemson and it's Dabo Swinney. They're not going to totally go away. But I would say the early look at it right now, where are we on? January 12th right now. Yeah. Look at 8 months ahead, I would say Georgia is your favorite. Then you have to throw in the Alabamas, the LSUs, the Tennessees, the Ohio States, and the Michigans. And don't forget about Penn State and USC as well.
Yeah, Georgia minus 300, Ohio State plus 600, Bama plus 700. You mentioned USC at plus 700. I mean, look, they've got the play caller. We kind of know that they've got the talent. You just got to get rid of those late season losses. Michigan, can they get over that semifinal hump? When we come back from the break, I want to get into a little bit of hardball. We mentioned Texas and Clemson. Keep it locked in again midway through a Thursday edition of Back Your Play right here on Rich Q. All right, everyone, welcome back to a Thursday edition of BYP. Rich Quinones here. Nick Kosko joining us from On3 Sports, our college football insider, really our college expert, if you will. Give him a follow on Twitter, as always, at Nick Kosko 59. You mentioned hardball. I want to get into that for a moment. So everything's contingent on what Harbaugh is deciding to do. Now, again, is this an issue where we want to get over that semifinal hump? Forget about the odds aside at plus 1,000. You know he's going to be courted. I mean, we talked about this a week or so ago. We've had this conversation over the years. You look at some of these head coaching vacancies now in the NFL: Indianapolis, Carolina, Arizona, Denver, Houston. We don't know what's going to happen with Rivera and Washington. We don't know what's going to happen with Dallas and McCarthy, whether they beat Tampa Bay or not in the wild card game. Your gut right now, your gut reaction, do you believe Harbaugh stays at Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of echo my sentiment over the past couple of weeks when we've talked about this. I mean, I have to stick with my gut and say he is going to be back. I mean, I know the statement is kind of empty from him when you consider the factors of he interviewed for a job last year. He was trying to get the Minnesota Vikings job last year. He told athletic director Ward Manuel that this was not going to be a yearly thing, when it is a yearly thing now, because he's being courted again. He already interviewed for the Denver Broncos job. So is there a chance he goes back to the NFL this year? Absolutely. Or I should say for 2023, the upcoming season. Absolutely a chance. There's a pretty big chance. I would say at this point, you probably have to weigh it at 50-50 because it's either a yes or no. So I hate to put odds on it, but it is 50-50. And now with that statement, I consider it kind of empty because he always leaves the door open and he says, I expect to be enthusiastically coaching Michigan in 2023. Well, when you expect it, and you also say you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Now, these NCAA sanctions that we mentioned before, how it dates back to the 2020 season where they were illegally coaching or recruiting. I forget the exact terminology during the COVID season where there was a lot more restrictions just a couple of years ago. So what are the big penalties for that? Are there going to be big penalties? Are there going to be small penalties? Or is it going to be one of those slaps on the wrist? It's probably going to be a slap on the wrist. You know what I mean? So if that's the case, then he doesn't have to worry about that. I mean, I know everyone wants to make the joke of he's going to pull a Pete Carroll. Michigan gets in trouble, he jumps to the NFL. USC got in trouble, Pete Carroll jumps to the NFL and goes to the Seattle Seahawks.
That's a fair point.
It is a fair point. I don't know if that's going to happen. I still think he's going to stay because he is interviewing. I mean, I know he interviewed for Denver, but Denver's in on Sean Payton. And then if you look at the other openings, Carolina, I know he had a conversation with David Tepper, the owner, but it wasn't an interview. And then you look at the other potential opening. Does he want to go to Arizona? Would Arizona be interested in him? Does Jim Harbaugh want to coach Kyler Murray? I don't know about that. Maybe he does. Maybe he wants to take on that challenge. We do know that Jim Harbaugh, wherever he goes, it's a rebuilding project. He likes rebuilding projects. What team is a rebuilding project? His former team, the Indianapolis Colts, big rebuilding job. But does he want the Jim Irsay over him? I mean, Jim Irsay probably loves him. I don't know that for a fact.
He wants power.
But he wants power. Jim Harbaugh wants to be. Yeah. We saw the end of San Fran when he was with the 49ers. Sure. He goes to 3 straight NFC title games. He goes to a Super Bowl. And if it weren't for a blackout, probably would have gotten killed in the game or maybe would have won the game. Who knows? But he lost to his brother. Okay. It was one touchdown away from tying / winning that Super Bowl.
Yeah.
All right. And then he would have been in San Fran probably still to this day. He gets fired because they go 8-8 or whatever it was in his 4th year. And he did not get along with the ownership and upper management. So what team is willing to give him a little bit more leeway? Is that Carolina? Is that Indianapolis? I don't think it's Indianapolis, despite the fact there might be a good relationship between him and Jim Irsay. I don't think so, because you have Chris Ballard, the GM there. Obviously, he's a big power guy. He wants to make sure everything's by the book and in his vision. So I don't see him going anywhere. There's opportunities, but what is he willing to do at this point, even though he wants to win a Super Bowl?
Yeah, but that's the whole point. So I also, the power structure, we talk about it, there are just certain head coaches that want to be able to basically be the head coach and be the GM, and rarely does it work out. There are exceptions to the rule.
Right.
So I also believe, let's see what these sanctions are. They're not going to get an SMU death sentence, right? They're not.
No, of course not.
But
It could be a loss of a couple of scholarships. There could be a fine. To me, that's pretty much all this is going to end up being. And it might not be brought out until next fall.
right.
We're talking about.
But you got
I don't see a fast resolution to this at the moment.
Yeah. You have to remember one thing, and I can't preface this enough. All these guys, these big time schools, and they played in college, they played in the NFL, and even if they had moderate success or not, they all have massive egos. They all believe they can come in, reclamation project, fix the franchise, fix the team, fix the university. If Harbaugh leaves Michigan, does it really cripple that university?
Not necessarily, but what he's done since he got there, and I know it took him a handful of years until 2021 and this past season to get over the Ohio State hump,
Yes.
win a Big Ten title, get to the playoff. It took him till then to do that. But now, when you say if he leaves, where do you go next? Do they promote from within? Do they go somewhere else? I don't think anybody else is going to have the same amount of success as he did right off the bat. Now, they might have the holdovers, obviously, from his regime in terms of players and some of the staff, where you can kind of ride the wave into 2023. But do you beat Ohio State and get back to the Big Ten title game in the playoff? I don't think so. I think he makes that big of a difference, to be honest with you.
But that's all the more reason now, if we're basically saying, aside from winning a national championship, he's done everything that you would have finally getting over the hump and beating the rival, so to speak. Again, the ego. Now we're opening the checkbook. Come back to the NFL. You have, quote, unfinished business.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, when push comes to shove, sometimes they get burned out from coaching young kids. And then sometimes they get burned out from coaching adults who happen to be a headache as well. I'm not going to say he's going to go back to the NFL. And we don't even know if he left. We don't even want to speculate who would fill in the shoes on the sidelines for Michigan. But I'll tell you this, there's 32 head coaching jobs in the NFL. I had this conversation the other day with the fallout of Lovie Smith. A lot of these guys are saying it might be a bad spot. It might be a bad situation, but at least I can get my feet wet. Harbaugh, I think, is a kind of a different animal. The only two franchises I can really see opening up a checkbook and saying, you can do whatever the hell you want to do is Dallas, because they're probably going to do it with Sean Payton if they really court him. And you mentioned he likes to rebuild and he likes to fix franchises and schools and universities. Well, Denver, to me, if you can figure out what the hell's going on with a $240 million quarterback, you've got a defense. That's not a bad spot, man. It's
no, because they have
spot.
playmakers, and they obviously vastly underachieved here in 2022, and that nobody expected Russell Wilson to really tank it there. And then I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think anybody really expected Nathaniel Hackett to be that bad. But you know why Denver hired him? They hired him to pry Aaron Rodgers away from Green Bay
months ago, and it backfired.
Now, but it comes down to me. What does Jim Harbaugh want? Now we know he wants a Super Bowl. That's without question. He doesn't have to say that out loud. We know he wants to win a Super Bowl to basically complete his coaching legacy. He's won the Big Ten twice. He's gotten to the playoff. He's beaten Ohio State. What do you want? He beat Michigan State this year as well. He conquered the rivals from Michigan. He rebuilt the program. They won the Big Ten 2 times in a row. Now, they didn't get to the national championship game, nor did they win a national championship. But the one thing that's missing from his trophy case, aside from a college football title, is the Super Bowl, where he was this close to getting it. Now, if he goes to Denver, you got to figure out the Russell Wilson situation. What kind of quarterback does he want? Does he want a young quarterback that he can groom? Does he want a veteran like Russell Wilson? You keep mentioning Dallas, which I think is also very interesting, but it's a matter of waiting. Now, they could only have to wait a week, and they might fire McCarthy after Monday. We know that. It's totally possible what Jerry Jones is going to do. But does Jim Harbaugh want to take on a billion-dollar man like Dak Prescott as his quarterback and coach him a different way when he's already been in the league since, 2016? Does he want a young quarterback? Does he want to draft somebody? I mean, I can't throw out Houston because I think Houston's an absolute dumpster fire. I don't think he'd be interested in the Houston Texans, but I mean, they have the number 2 overall pick. Maybe they take a quarterback. Maybe they take Bryce Young. Maybe they take Will Levis. Maybe they take CJ Stroud. Does Jim Harbaugh go that route and say, yeah, if you give me 5 years, I'll develop this guy into something?
I think 2 things real quick. I think because Chicago's on the clock, they really have to consider taking that kid. I don't know if Fields is the answer. I know they want to surround him. That's a conversation.
I mean, that's a separate conversation.
For another day.
Vehemently disagree with you there, but I mean, that is a conversation for another day.
You like Fields?
I love Fields. I think Justin Fields is the answer for them.
I'm not saying I don't like him. I don't think that franchise. It's hard. I think the kid has talent, but I don't believe that they want to surround him. I get the sense they've lost already patience with him, and I think that kid can play. And it's ridiculous to say because they haven't really given him talent. But my point is, how these teams are. These quarterbacks are on a very short leash. Look what's going on up the turnpike with the Jets. They're on a very short leash.
But by that logic, the way you say that, now if you reset the clock and you take a guy like Bryce Young, how long do they give him? Do they give him 2 years? Do they give him 3 years? I mean, Fields only just got done his second year.
I know.
He finally showed you something. He had the second most rushing yards by a quarterback in a single season. He improved as a passer under a new regime, under a defensive head coach, by the way. Yeah. So don't forget, Luke Getsy was doing a good job as the offensive coordinator this year to kind of revive Justin Fields. Say, oh yeah, you did all this cool stuff in college. Let's do it in the pros now. But he has nothing around him. So that's why, I mean, I know it's a separate conversation. But
who do you think goes number one?
If they decide to go number one, I would draft Will Anderson, the Alabama linebacker. I would draft him. Unless the Bears want a King's ransom or a treasure trove for that pick, I would trade it. You draft Will Anderson or you trade it. You start rebuilding. You start building around Fields with draft picks, receivers, tight ends, offensive line, some other defenders later in the draft. That's what you do if you're Chicago. I don't think you take Bryce Young.
Real quick, Clemson plus 1,500, obviously new quarterback. Texas plus 2,000, 8-5. They ended on a sour note with the loss to Washington. Again, I kind of gave you the lay of the land with these teams. I mean, where do you see Clemson? Where do you see Texas next year in the mix?
Well, that's tough to say because the ACC is a little unpredictable. I know we saw a wide open ACC this year that Clemson ended up winning anyway over North Carolina. I really like Florida State. The fact that they got Jordan Travis back next year at quarterback, he's going to be in the Heisman conversation. So I think Florida State can give Clemson a run for their money. I think the ACC is rising a bit again. So you're going to have Clemson. As long as Cade Klubnik actually develops at quarterback, and I know he was kind of thrown to the wolves this year, but DJ Uiagalelei went downhill since his freshman year when he subbed in for Trevor Lawrence for a game and a half. So, I mean, Clemson's still the favorite in the ACC. I would say North Carolina's going to be back in the mix with Drake May. It's all about the quarterback. So I would put Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State's in there. Maybe if Miami actually does more than just recruit well under Mario Cristobal, they'll be back in the running. But they were my biggest disappointment this year, not to get off the beaten path there. As far as Texas, it all depends on Quinn Ewers. I still don't believe – I mean, I would like to believe that they're going to sit Arch Manning for a year and make him redshirt and let Quinn Ewers run with that job next year, because he showed flashes this year. He was just banged up, but then he went downhill a little bit. But they're going to have no more Bijan Robinson. He's going to the NFL. Has that offense has that offense move on without a stud running back like that? It is up to Ewers and Steve Sarkisian to run that offense. Should they be in the running for the Big 12? And I mean, I saw a question today, actually, from my guy, JD Piquel, who's one of our main hosts over at On3 on our On3 YouTube channel. He posed a question today, and he said, is it Big 12 title or bust for Sarkisian next year? I said yes, but with a caveat. Yes, because that's the way Texas thinks, but it shouldn't be until year 4, year 5. He's only going to year 3 next year. And the way I say it is, Ewers can maybe get you there and win you a title if it all falls the right way. But if you have Arch Manning, this guy got Arch Manning to commit. Okay, if he sits for a year 4, he's going to be a redshirt freshman. You have at least 2 years with Arch Manning before he goes to the NFL. At least 2. So give him some more time on that. So that's my thing with Texas. I would like to believe Arch Manning redshirts next year, but if he's that good, maybe you have to put him in right away. So Texas is probably dependent upon how Ewers develops or if Arch Manning is that good right away. But as far as those teams contending for a national title, I'm not going to put Clemson in there, or certainly not Texas in there next year.
Lastly, before I let you get out of here, and always appreciate a couple moments, give me a name other than Harbaugh from the college ranks that you're hearing a little buzz that might be a good NFL candidate for one of these coaching positions, some of these vacancies that I mentioned, or is it right now just all Harbaugh centric?
I would say it's Harbaugh centric, but if you saw the report the other day, I think Schefter broke it that David Shaw, the former Stanford head coach, I think he's interviewing for the Denver Broncos job, and he's always been a guy. I know you as a Giant fan, there's always been the social media speculation of should the Giants hire David Shaw and bring him out east. David Shaw is a heck of a coach, man. Don't let the last couple of years at Stanford damper it. Don't forget, this guy won. He took over right after Jim Harbaugh left Stanford. Okay, Harbaugh went from Stanford to the 49ers. Shaw took over and ran with the job. He got to the Rose Bowl a couple of times. He won a couple Pac-12 titles. The last couple of years, obviously not good, but don't forget Stanford's immense academic standards prevents you from recruiting at the level of an Oregon, a Washington, a USC, and a UCLA, despite their fine academic institutions. But Stanford's a different animal. I think he just kind of got burned out by the job, so he stepped away. And I think if he wants a new challenge, a fresh look at the job, why not go to the NFL? And he's obviously interviewing at Denver. So if Denver thinks he's a good candidate, I would say David Shaw may be a guy worth looking at from the college ranks, even though he stepped away from the Stanford job. So I would say David Shaw for sure. But other than that, it's horrible or bust here, and then we'll move on from there.
Yeah. Well, we might know by Monday around 11:30.
Yeah, we could. You never know.
Yeah. Is Nick Kosko. Follow him on Twitter at Nick Kosko 59. Does a great job covering college football, college sports really, but excellent college football on 3 Sports, play-by-play, Are You Wrestling, and of course in our backyard in Garden State does a ton of high school play-by-play as well, covering all gamuts of high school sports. Appreciate you jumping on a Thursday edition of BYP, pal.
Appreciate you as always, Rich.
All right, be well.